Extended detection and response, also known as XDR. That's the topic of this latest To The Point webcast. Hello, I'm Maggie Miller here with Dave Gruber. He is Endpoint Security Analyst at ESG Group. So welcome, Dave.
Well, thanks, Maggie. So glad to be here today.
So what is XDR and what's its value to organizations?
Well, there's a tremendous amount of talk about XDR, but when we think of XDR at ESG, we think of XDR as an integrated suite of security products that span hybrid IT architectures, that's designed to interoperate and coordinate on threat prevention, detection, and response. When you're using XDR, you'll be unifying control points, security telemetry, analytics, and operations into a single enterprise system. And the impact on security teams is that XDR is going to bring a new level of visibility across all the different threat vectors of the organization, bring it to the console of the security operations analyst so that they can investigate, detect, and respond to some of the more advanced threats that are taking place today.
So why is it important to have solutions that provide 1 year telemetry versus the standard 30 to 60 days?
Well, so that's interesting. So first of all, let's take a quick step back before I answer that and look at what XDR is trying to bring together. So with the level of advanced threats that are happening today, we see threats that move around the environment from one threat vector to another until they actually create an attack sequence where an adversary can get at the resources that they want. And so to have proper visibility and to understand those kinds of attacks, we need to capture telemetry from lots of different control points in the organization. And those things include endpoint and network and cloud and email and others. And so while endpoint is an important part of the conversation, it's not the only part of the conversation. The rest of the telemetry matters. So when we talk about how much data is required and how much time is covered, some of these low and slow threats that are happening may dwell in the infrastructure for weeks or months, upwards to a year, while adversaries are doing reconnaissance to figure out what they're going to do in the environment. And without a long tail perspective on that data, being able to trace that data back over the course of several months, we sometimes miss some of the clues that tell us what's happening for attacks.
And so gathering enormous amounts of data is very important, but also conceptualizing, prioritizing, and fast remediation is also important, especially when it comes to endpoint security. Could you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, let's unpack what you just said there a little bit. So the data provides us the ability to layer on analytics, and that the purpose of that analytics, of course, is to thread together indicators of compromise, indicators of attack, so we can stitch together what we would understand to become an incident over a period of time. Typically, those incidents will include some part of the endpoint world, but not always. Certainly plenty of incidents that start in an app in the cloud and only live there. But in that case, the endpoint that we'd be talking about would be specifically a cloud workload or something. Using this notion of XDR, we bring that data together, we layer on the analytics, we correlate those alerts, and we ultimately discover very specifically incidents. And then we're able to respond to those incidents in a number of ways. Now, if we talk about endpoint security, we would respond by taking some action on an individual endpoint. But in many of the more advanced attacks, that's not enough. We need to respond by blocking an IP address or a command and control server that for an attack that's underway today. We may also isolate different components of the infrastructure. So we might isolate an endpoint, we might take a workload offline. So there's a number of remediation actions that we would trigger as well as part of the response process, ultimately trying to contain and stop and recover from the attack.
So in a use case scenario, could you explain the value XDR brings to organizations such as in a security operations center?
Well, so when we think of XDR, we think about security operations. And of course, security operations takes on many forms. In some organizations, it's one person whose role is to do security operations. In larger organizations, we have tens, 50 to 100 people that are involved in security operations in larger organizations. XDR is a is at the end of the day, it's automation. So it's an automated solution that helps bring this data together to support. First use case would be investigation. And so, and as we attempt to detect threats in progress or potential threats to the organization, we investigate those threats, and XDR is a terrific tool to help with investigations. Solutions like Tanium add enormous value as part of that process because it gives the analyst access to real-time information about what's happening in the infrastructure. And once we investigate and determine that we need to take action, XDR also enables us to respond. And as you think about the role that Tanium plays as well, in addition to real-time insights about what's happening in the infrastructure, we also have the ability to respond in real time as well. And so while a number of the XDR vendors provide different levels of response capabilities, tools like Tanium provide a really powerful add-on to the XDR environment to be able to take action when action is needed.
As XDR emerges as the new alternative to the traditional endpoint detection and incident response, how do you believe this will change the way decision makers approach security?
Well, that's kind of an interesting question, because at the end of the day, I'm not sure that it changes the way people approach security as much as it is a way to look at the scope of what we're securing and the scope of the environment. Now, every security executive understands that they have to secure the entire enterprise, and that's a big ask, right? There's a lot of different assets that make up the attack surface, a lot of different security controls that comprise that solution. XDR brings a lot of those pieces together, so it supports a general trend, which is convergence of security technologies. And so this is a convergence of the detection and response capabilities into one consolidated enterprise environment. There's a number of other trajectories that are also converging in the world of security. So I think the real answer to that question is it's more of a converged, broad enterprise scale approach to solving one of the important aspects of a security program.
That's a great way of looking at it. And so there are several vendors out there who offer the entire XDR suite, but what if a customer doesn't want every pillar of XDR from one vendor? You know, how does it go with integrations? How do they work, and do they benefit customers?
Yeah, so to answer that question, I have to spell out the types of XDR solutions in the marketplace. There's really three primary approaches to XDR solutions. One, as you just described, is more of a turnkey, comprehensive set of security controls and analytics, detection, and response. And for those vendors, they provide a set of security controls. They provide the analytics, they provide the detection and response engines. It's a very holistic approach. It doesn't work for everybody, though. Those kind of solutions are good for people who are willing to or have a strategy to commit to one vendor, or at least a large quantity of their security technology to a single vendor. And that's not something that you see in a majority of enterprises today. And so for those companies that have a diverse set of security vendors and security tools, there are other approaches, including what I call the overlay XDR approach, which is really the analytics engine that sits on top of the rest of your security infrastructure. So all your primary security controls, endpoint, network, application, email, and others, and can perform the core data ingest, so the data pipelining, the analytics, the detection, and some of the response capabilities. So that's the overlay category. And the last category, so there's three, which is what I call the alliance strategy, which is when you're architecting your own, you're basically building your own XDR infrastructure. And I think that's the one that you're really speaking about in this case. Many organizations would claim that they have a best of breed strategy. They're going to buy the best tools and they're going to assemble and architect and integrate on their own. Many of the security companies today are working together to facilitate these alliances and allow companies to have a choice and not lock into an individual vendor, architect what they believe to be the best fit. And for those companies, the sort of secret to success there is choosing solutions that are built to work together, so that have solid APIs, integrations are well tested, vendors already have working relationships, and are willing to work together with a more complex set of skills and architecture to put all that together. Now, I do want to just make note. I think Tanium is a terrific tool set, regardless of which any of those three that you choose, because they all have different levels of visibility, different levels of response and remediation capabilities. Tanium ups the game really for all of these approaches. Tanium provides a level of real-time visibility that few could ever offer, the ability to real-time respond in ways that few organizations could. So that immediacy, that immediate, and the speed of access and response and investigation, think of it as an accelerant to all of the XDR solutions.
And finally, what's one key takeaway about XDR and endpoint security you would recommend to organizations?
In the theme of convergence, first of all, it's for us to fight the level of sophisticated advanced attacks that are happening today. We need to go beyond the endpoint, and going beyond the endpoint, XDR allows us an approach to do so. So you can think of XDR as a step in the evolution of capabilities that EDR started or endpoint security vendors have put in motion for a number of years now. That's good news. Lots of lessons have been learned throughout the evolution of EDR. Those lessons are being carried forward in the world of XDR. That's also a really good thing for all of us. So as the span of visibility and detection and response increases with XDR type solutions, I think it should feel like a natural step for most organizations who either are evaluating EDR solutions or have already invested in EDR. It's not going to feel like an unnatural step. And it's frankly one of the reasons why XDR has so much traction today.
Wow. Well, thank you, Dave, for these great insights. I appreciate your time. And thank you all for watching. If you have any other questions or want to learn more about XDR and Tanium, you can contact us by going to tanium.com. I'm Maggie Miller, and this is To The Point.